Hello, and welcome to Life Matters, the program where we engage life issues with critical thinking and a biblical worldview. Life Matters is an educational outreach resource of Assure Women's Center in Omaha, Nebraska. We're honored to host a variety of guests within the pro-life movement, each bringing their own unique perspectives, experiences, and backgrounds. The views and opinions expressed by our guests do not necessarily reflect those of Life Matters, Assure Women's Center, or our affiliates. Our goal is to foster open, thoughtful dialogue around life-affirming issues and equip listeners to stand for life.
Welcome to Life Matters. I'm Toni Clarke, Executive Director of Assure Women's Center in Omaha, Nebraska. Today we're joined by two special guests, Joy Graves, a staff member at Assure Women's Center, and her daughter, Ebony Turner. Ebony is now a mother herself, giving us a unique opportunity to talk not only about how faith and pro-life values were passed down to her, but also how she is now intentionally passing those same values down to her own children. Today's conversation is about how parents, especially moms, can intentionally build a culture of life within their homes. We'll discuss what those conversations look like in Joy and Ebony's family, what worked well, what didn't, and how those messages were received from a daughter's perspective. We'll also explore what it looks like for the next generation to now carry those values forward in their own parenting. Our hope is to encourage and equip parents to have meaningful conversations about faith, relationships, sexuality, pregnancy, and the value of every human life. Joy and Ebony, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking to you guys. So Joy, let's start with you. Can you share a little about your family and how, as a mom, you planted seeds or had discussions with your kids about life issues?
Me and my husband, we've been married for quite a while. We have two kids that are adults. Now we have grandkids. And as far as planting seeds, that's hard to say. That's a hard question to answer.
Okay. I think about that myself. I don't know that how many seeds I planted before I actually was in my role as executive director. We just did life, so I don't know. I certainly think once I started working here, the kids got plenty of seeds, but I don't know how many they got prior to me working at Assure.
Right. And that's what I think about too. As a Christian family, we focus on our relationship with God was the most important thing.
Right.
And my brother had reminded me that Dwight used to say when the kids were little, he would tell the kids, you could do anything I do.
Okay.
Because sometimes we're raised, don't do what I do, do what I say. We wanted to make sure that we weren't living a hypocritical life in front of our kids. What they hear in church every Sunday is how their parents are living.
Absolutely. That's good. I like that. Do what I do versus what else. Yeah, that's good. So, Ebony, when you think back on your childhood and teenage years, would you say conversations about faith and life issues were normal in your home?
Yes, as I think those lessons came naturally as life happened and as we saw things happening around us. I think that a lot of those lessons maybe you can't plan for, but you see things happening in your family or situations come up outside, and then it just becomes a conversation. And I would say with my parents, nothing was off limits. If we saw something and we asked about it, it became a discussion, and that was the lesson in itself.
Yeah, I say the same thing for my family as well. I don't know that we intentionally, plan to, have conversations. They just came up, and when something came up, we talked about it.
Right.
I would say age, appropriate. If a topic came up, we addressed it as they came up. I don't know that we purposely said, okay, today we're going to talk about, X, Y, and Z. It was more generic or more, what's that word I'm looking for? More organic. That's the word I was looking for. Organic. Yeah. So, Ebony, what are some of the earliest memories that you have of your mom talking about faith, pregnancy, relationships, or the value of life?
I would say I think the question of pro-life, I don't know if I ever asked specifically what that meant, but just being around church, being around, growing up in church, it's like you hear the Bible, so it's like when, that verse that says, when you're in your mother's womb,
Right.
you were knit together, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like some of these concepts, it just fell into place,
Right.
and it made sense. So there were some things that it wasn't really, I didn't have to ask if what we believed about it, because I already knew our Christian values. But I would say that I grew up in Portland, Oregon, on the West Coast, the left coast. It's very liberal. It was very liberal in the 90s when I was growing up. So there were a lot of things that now I think they're more of the forefront, that people, I don't want to say they make a huge deal about it, but it was like those same kinds of things were going on. But we came home and asked our parents about it, and they said, this is what we believed. And it was like, oh, okay, or we already knew if we heard something at school that, well, this didn't sound right. We came home and that was confirmed. But I would say that foundation, the biblical foundation, was already laid. So there were some things that it didn't take too much discussion to know what our family value was.
Yeah, absolutely. Joe, were there certain moments, events, or movies, maybe some news stories or like pregnancies in your community that opened the door for discussions in your home?
Well, I think just like Ebony said, they were raised mainly in Portland, Oregon, which is a very liberal town, very liberal. So anything goes there. So there was always something, in our community. There was teenage pregnancies, just all kinds of things. And
Yeah.
we tried to get in front of it.
Yeah.
And to be quite honest, thinking about it, and I can't say we plan to teach our kids. What we had was kitchen table talk. We refer to it as kitchen table talk. When you guys are at home, when we're eating dinner, when we're talking, anything you guys want to talk about religion, politics, social issues. But we would have to teach our kids, but you have to watch how you speak when you're outside, when you're at school or you're at work, because you may offend other people. You may have a different opinion than other people. And I'm not saying compromise what we believed in, but know what you believe in.
Absolutely. I like the dinner table conversations. We had those as well. And like I said, it was just kind of age appropriate. I remember once we were on our way up the hill to our church, and we had been to a young man and young lady's wedding. And she was pregnant, and they had been a part of our small group, but they were getting married. And my youngest daughter, I don't remember how old she was, but she was starting to put two and two together, getting four. And I think it just kind of clicked. She was like, wait a minute, it takes a baby, 9 months, and they only been married 4 months. So what happened? And happened like, oh goodness, we're on our way to church, just almost at the church door. But once again, age appropriate, we took that opportunity to talk about, God's design for marriage and God's design for the family. Wasn't something that we planned. It just kind of came about. But that's just one that always sticks in my mind. It just, like you said, teen pregnancies are around. I grew up in Chicago, so that was a common thing for me as well. But just using those everyday conversations with our kids, I think that is so much more helpful, I think, than just saying, hey, today we're going to sit down and talk about the birds and the bees.
Right. Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Ebony, what kind of, from a daughter's perspective, what kinds of conversations made you feel safe enough to listen and engage?
I would say that I knew my parents. Now that I'm older, I know more of their story, but we lived in proximity enough to how they grew up. And so I knew enough of their story to know that they were trying to do better, just like their parents before them in every generation.
Yeah.
So I think I've always had a respect for my parents when you're little, it doesn't seem, when you're young, it seems like, oh, my parents are so strict and this and that. But it's like, well, look at the alternative. So I think I've always respected parents that had those boundaries, because I saw people that didn't have boundaries, and I never had to wonder if my parents were coming home. I never had to wonder if I was going to have a hot meal or if my dad was going to be there. Those are things I just never had to, I didn't think about as a kid. And so seeing the kids who maybe they had more freedom, but they also took on a lot more burden when they were younger than I ever had to.
Yeah, that's good. As we try to encourage people through this our time today to engage with their kids, this is a question I'll ask both of you. What approaches or conversations sometimes felt less effective or harder to receive as a child or a teenager? Joy, are there things that you look back on, you say, man, I wish I hadn't done that, and Ebony, are there things that, I won't say your mom could have done differently, but are there things that you would encourage other people to do, that perhaps they're not doing?
Having regret of how we raised our kids, I'm sure there were things we could have done differently, but we wanted to, I'm glad that we erred on, it worked out by the grace of God. There are some grown kids that are estranged from their parents, crying in the corner, complaining about how they were raised. All parents do the best that they can to raise their kids. Like Ebony said, all generations should want the next generation to do better.
Yeah.
So and like Ebony said, how I grew up, I'm not downing my parents, but I wanted something different. When we got married, we took the good, the bad, the ugly out of how we were raised, and we decided what we wanted to do.
Anything, Ebony?
So I would say, I heard a quote, I heard a friend that she said, everyone is a perfect mom until they become a mom.
Yeah.
And I think we all have ideas of what it is to be a parent, or what my parents should have done, or I wish this was different and that was different. But until I became a mom, I realized that, my parents, they probably had no clue what they were doing. They were just taking it day to day. And even more so, we live in the age of information. I can, my kids, if I don't know how to do their homework, I can chat GPT it. I can look stuff up on the internet. So sometimes I tell my mom, I don't know how they did it. I don't know how they did it without like grocery delivery and all of these conveniences that we have now. So, before you become a parent, you have a lot of ideas, but once your kid gets to certain ages, and all kids are different. I have one twin that's very inquisitive and one that doesn't care. So it's, all kids are different as well, and things that you can discuss with them and questions that they ask. But definitely as I become older, I see that, my parents, they probably, they were winging it and doing the best they could with what they had, the resources that they had.
Absolutely. That's good.
Life Matters is the program where we engage life issues with critical thinking and a biblical worldview, and it is a ministry of Assure Women's Center. Assure Women's Center is a nationally recognized pro-life pregnancy center based in Omaha, Nebraska. Assure is helping women with unplanned pregnancies take the first step to life. To learn more about the ministry of Assure, visit firststeptolife.com. That's firststeptolife.com. There you can learn about the many services we provide, including how we come alongside abortion-minded mothers and empower women to choose life for her and her baby.
You're listening to Life Matters with Toni Clarke, Executive Director of Assure Women's Center in Omaha, Nebraska. Today we're talking with Joy Graves and her daughter Ebony Turner about how faith and pro-life values are passed from one generation to the next, and how parents can intentionally build a culture of life within their homes. Joy, did you have a hard time balancing teaching biblical truth while also keeping communication open and relational?
Well, when it came to it seems straight and to the point when there's an issue and you could go to the Bible to back it up. I remember the first year because when I grew up, I never remember my parents being involved with politics, voting, or anything. And I remember the first year I voted, it was just a friend of mine that said, well, you should vote according to the Bible, and that makes it easy. As far as relational, my story, I had an abortion at 15. So Dwight and I, when you think about it, we're two 15-year-olds trying to deal with a post-abortion things. We didn't have anyone to follow up on us. None of the adults in our lives knew how to support us, so we were just on our own. And now we're adults, we have kids, so we're trying to kind of live life so our kids aren't in that situation, and still not share our story. I've heard of some people, when it comes to pro-life and abortion, they remember being like little kids and their parents talking about abortions. And I was like, oh my goodness, just how did they do that? But our kids didn't know about it until recently, and now they're adults or whatever, so that probably would have explained a lot to them, why we did things the way we did, why my house was the Kool-Aid house. I didn't let my kids go to other people's house. The kids came to our house to hang out. I wanted to see what was going on, So that way they wouldn't be in the situations. I wanted them to break the cycles of the teenage pregnancies and all that other kind of stuff. So you don't even have to make that decision,
That's good. I like you call it the Kool-Aid house. I always wanted to be that house that I would rather people come, because I know it goes on in my house. And I always wanted my house to be the place where the girls came. And I would say my girls probably didn't necessarily want to come to my house, but their friends certainly did. Just recently one of Alyssa's my oldest, one of her friends came to me at church and just said, thank you for, how you treated me as a kid. And it just really touched my heart, because where Alyssa was trying to get out the house, her friends enjoy coming to the house and, just being in our kitchen or whatever. And so I think that's another way for us anyway. I hope anyway, my girls feel like that was a way that I kind of kept things open with them, because I wanted them to be around. I still do. I love having, my girls around it, and we can talk about anything. I think that's really important. But yeah, Ebony, did you feel like you could ask any question or honest questions growing up without being shamed or shut down?
Yes, I think I know for sure my dad was one that he was always ready. And I think my mom, sometimes there was probably times we asked questions and she was like, okay, we're going to talk to dad about that. And sometimes she can, and I know now that I have kids that sometimes it takes them time to learn, okay, what do we talk about? We're at the store, what kind of questions do we ask? Or maybe we wait until later. So some of those surprises, sometimes I know for sure she said that, okay, we're going to talk to your dad, but no, not shame. Not shame. And I would say, I think there was a time I remember in high school that I come home and I was telling my mom something I learned, and she was like, oh, okay. And she was like, well, what do you think? And I had, like I said, we already had that biblical foundation. Yeah. So I said, well, the Bible says A, B, and C. And, it wasn't a thing that she had to tell me. She didn't have to tell me anything because that foundation was already laid.
Yeah. Good. That's good. Good. So, like, many parents worry that if they talk about sex and abortion or relationships, that they're somehow encouraging certain behaviors. What would you say to that concern? And then I'll say from this standpoint, I just kind of remember growing up, not having very many conversations about relationships. It was always keep your legs closed, keep your dress down.
Right.
We didn't talk about, sex. We didn't talk about abortion. And, once again, not knocking how my parents raised me. I think they did what they knew.
Right.
But what would you say to that, to parents that kind of worry about having those conversations with their kids?
I think I was raised with the same thing as you, that my parents, they just didn't talk about it. It just wasn't discussed at all. But I definitely could say, if you don't talk about it with them, somebody else, they'll learn from somewhere else. And what they learn may not be correct, because everything that comes up from, the internet isn't correct. So I think it's better to go on and teach them,
Mhm.
Let it come from you, so that way they're not guessing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that I've heard you hear that I don't know if it's like Generation X or the baby boomers about how they say, well, we just didn't talk about things, but I do think that a lot of these things, it wasn't so in our
Yeah.
face like it is today. And so we're forced to have a lot of conversations that,
Right.
Mhm.
and I feel like sometimes it's earlier and earlier, we're forced to have these conversations because there's some things that it
Mhm.
just wasn't an issue. There's some it wasn't a thing um of kids having so much access that they have now. So there's some things that didn't have to be discussed because, you know, as long as you were, in certain safe environments or whatever, it's like it wasn't an issue. So I think that we are living in a different time where it's just in our face, and it's forced us to be open. And like my mom said, if you're not talking about it, someone is talking about it. Or they're, I might not let my kids have TikTok, but one of their friends has TikTok and they're showing them something on the phone. And so it's just very much in the forefront now. So many things, I'm sure it'll continue
Abs-
to be as things
Yeah.
change.
Absolutely. Like you said, I'm going to say it, so this will be 3 times that it's been said. If we're not talking to them about it, somebody else certainly is.
Right.
And I would much rather them hear things from my perspective. I mean, they're going to hear it regardless. And so I would rather give them a biblical perspective and my perspective so that they can counter that with what they're hearing that may be different than what, we're teaching at home or whatever. So I think it's super important that we continue to talk to our kids. Ebony, were there ways your mom modeled pro-life values beyond just conversations for you?
I would say she's always been a nurturer. Both of my parents have. They've always been people that gave. And as long as I could remember, they were always willing to take people in or just help out in any way. I know that some opponents to pro-life, they say, well, it's not just the baby, but it's after, what happens after. And I think they very much embodied that. Um, of my parents were always nurturers after, and they were always
Mhm.
concerned um, about the well-being of kids.
Yeah. That's good. I'm glad you said that because sometimes when we talk about pro-life, people automatically think, baby, and which is that's a big part of it. But how you treat people in everyday life also reflects, how you value human life, whether it's someone that's homeless or someone that is just different from who we are. And I think and when I asked you that question, I was thinking about myself. How have I modeled, or did I model? Was I a good pro like model for my girls? And I think that what you said makes a lot of sense, Ebony. I think my girls saw me respect people, and that respect for people hopefully translates into, I respect, a baby's life, or I respect a pregnant mom's life, all those things. So that's good. That's good. So how important do you think modeling compassion, grace, and consistency is to compare to simply teaching rules? So not just the rules, but how important is it that we model compassion and grace and consistency versus not just following rules?
I think it's very important because to s- to some people, we're the only Bible that they will ever read. When it comes to certain things, I'm a believer
Mhm.
first. I'm not a political party. I'm a believer
Mhm.
first. And my one biggest thing is I want people to come across me. When they come across me, I want them to I want their life to be improved. So I can't be hypocritical. It's just something that you have to have, you know. You just have to have it. I just love life. You love people. You want to show them grace and mercy because God has shown me grace and mercy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
there are some things that we can teach theoretically, but there are some things that it's only practical. And we can only show those things in those situations.
Mm-hmm.
And so modeling becomes, it's like if there's an art and a science, the science is the words and the textbooks, the textbook, but the art is actually when we're on the street and you see someone that they're needing something, and explaining to the kids that, you know, this person, you know, they need something. And sometimes my kids have said, well, then, because they know that I always say, well, where do you get money from? You have to work. So sometimes they've said, well, I thought you said if you need money, you have to work. And I've explained to them people are in different situations. So in some situations, either people can't work for whatever reason, but people are not in these situations because they want to be here. At the end of the day, you have to have empathy. And so I think that's the part that has to be modeled for them. And then also sometimes we can teach things that it's not, we have to make sure that it's practical and it's relevant to their situation, and yeah, just showing them how to live that out, and not just be a hearer of the word, but also be a doer.
Well, thank you both so much for joining me today and for sharing your experiences so openly and honestly. I appreciate you taking the time to just talk about, life issues and what you guys experienced. Ebony, with you growing up, and Joy, with you mothering Ebony. So thank you guys so much.
All right. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
We want to thank you for joining us on Life Matters this week. Life Matters is an educational outreach resource of Assure Women's Center in Omaha, Nebraska. To learn more about the ministry of Assure, visit firststeptolife.com. There you can learn about the many services we provide, including how we come alongside abortion-minded mothers and empower women to choose life for her and her baby, as well as find our most current broadcasts and all of our past episodes. Thanks for listening to Life Matters. Join us again next week at the same time right here on BOT Radio Network.